Hello, my name's Vicky and I would like to share with you some ideas to get drawing and painting. Outside of work, I absolutely love to paint and draw. I find it very relaxing and it can help me unwind from work. So hopefully you can follow along and you can soon realise that it's not difficult to draw. Lots of people say to me, oh, I can't draw, I can't even do a stick figure, but you absolutely can. Like anything, you just need to practice, and the more you practice, the better you'll get, and probably the more you'll enjoy it. I think the other thing to say is that you can't go wrong, so don't be afraid to experiment, don't be afraid to try things, and don't worry so much about the end result, just really enjoy the process. So I won't be able to cover everything in one short video, but I can definitely give you an introduction into how I approach drawing and sketching with a couple of little hints and ideas for you. And I hope it's something you can just do and have a lot of fun with. So to get started, you will need a piece of paper. This is watercolour paper, which is quite thick and it has a nice texture to it. And if you go on to use watercolour, it just means that the paper can hold a little bit of the water and it doesn't crumple and disintegrate. You will also need a pencil. It doesn't really matter what pencil you use. You can use any pencil. I have a range of pencils here. You'll see that there's a letter and a number sometimes on the pencils. H stands for hard, so that will create quite light and fine marks because the pencil is very hard. If you have a pencil with a B on it, so this one is 2B, the B stands for black, so you will start to make slightly darker marks. You can also vary the intensity of the marks by how hard you press. So even with this 2B pencil, if I press quite lightly, I'll make quite a light mark. I can press quite a lot harder and you'll see the marks becoming darker. If I go to quite a dark, so there's a 5B, so you can see how much darker that is compared to that one. And again, if I press quite lightly, it's making light marks and I can press harder. The other thing you can do, which is quite nice, is to use the side of the pencil and you can cover larger areas and you can create quite different effects with that. So it's probably worth just playing around before you get started. If you've got a range of pencils, you can just try different ones and you can make different marks just to have a go at using the pencils. So the other thing you might want to do is add a little bit of colour, and it's really worth getting a set of watercolours. So I've got a tin here. These are quite nice watercolours. Winsor & Newton is one of the better makes of watercolour. And it's probably quite an expensive kit, this one, but you can get really inexpensive kits of watercolour. As with anything, the more you pay, the better quality the product. So the higher quality means there's more pigment in the paint and your colours will be much more intense. But to get started, it really doesn't matter and you just want to play around with technique. And watercolours are so easy because they can come in a nice little tin like this. So you can take them out and about if you want to do any sketching outside. They usually include a little palette so you can mix paints in here. And all you need is water, so just a jam jar with some water in and a brush. These shaped brushes are quite nice because they have a point on the end so you can do quite fine work, and because they're quite full bodied they hold a lot of water and you can get quite a lot of paint down, or you can work wet into wet. So with watercolour you can wet the paper first, and that's where it's worth having a good quality watercolour paper because it will hold quite a lot of water. And then you can just play around with water. So if you've already wet the paper, you can see that as you add the colour, it blends really nicely into the paper. If you add colour to dry paper, you can see quite a different effect. So you could use quite a dry brush and dry paper, and you can see you can make very intense colours. You can also blend that, so you can add water and just start to blend the edges out. And then what you can do with your watercolour is blend colours. So you can bring other colours in and you can start to blend those. You could wait till these are dry and then you can layer another colour over the top, or you can blend them like that while they're wet. The other thing you can do really simply with watercolour, so if you just take a bit of, I've just got a bit of kitchen towel here, but you can actually lift some of the colour out. So if you want to create some nice highlights or different effects in your work, you can lift those colours out. You need to do that while it's wet, and some of the watercolours, depending on which colour you use, they're more staining, so they will stain the paper a little bit as well, and it's harder to lift it out. You can see where I've put the wet on wet there, and it's just starting to bleed out around the edges, and you can get some really nice effects. Sometimes you might want that to happen and sometimes you might not want it to happen. But again, you just really need to play around and see what the watercolours can do. So next you need to get your photo reference, or you might set up a still life at home, or perhaps go outside and choose a landscape to draw. It really doesn't matter. Just want to play around and have fun. I absolutely love drawing hares. Really, I just love their big ears and the big feet, and they have cute faces and whiskers, and you can really play around with all those features. So I'm going to do just a loose sketch, and I'm not going to worry about detail too much at all to begin with. And when you're working, you just really want to keep an eye on your composition. Now I'm going to have to be careful, otherwise I'm going to actually run off the page. So I think most people, when they start out, I think tend to work too small, and you want to avoid working too small because you'll get drawn into detail, and try and make sort of big, bolder, more gestural marks, and I think you'll have a lot more fun that way than trying to do something that's too detailed. So don't worry about detail, don't worry too much about getting anything accurate, you just want to have fun, really. And you can use some of the pencil techniques that you were playing around with earlier. So you might want to make some darker marks, and you might just press a little bit lighter. Try and keep the pencil moving across the page. And one thing that I think is a really good tip is just to keep your eyes moving all the time. So working from the reference picture to your drawing, just constantly working between the two. So it's just moving the pencil quite quickly. And then looking, and then as you're working, you'll start to notice darks and lights, and that's really the crux of drawing, is to take good notice of where your darks are and where your lights are, and that's what will bring your picture to life eventually. Rather than just being a 2D outline, you'll start to bring in form by adding darks and lights. So if you're looking at a still life, so if you're looking at a jug or a bowl or something like that, you'll see where the shadows are cast, and you really want to take note of those shadows. Otherwise you're just going to have the outline of a jug. So you can correct as you go. I've made this a little bit too big, I think. I could have maybe worked a little bit smaller, but hopefully we're going to have room to fit them all in on the page. So by moving quickly and keeping the pencil moving, you're not too worried about if one of your lines is wrong, and you can kind of correct as you go. And press not too hard at this stage, just if you want to make some corrections. If you haven't pressed too hard, your lines will be much easier to erase. So the other thing you can look at when you're drawing is what's called negative spaces. So rather than just looking at the shapes that the hare makes, you might want to look at some of the negative spaces. So for example, between his ears, you might look at the shape of the sky between his ears, and that can help you just focus in a slightly different way. Another technique to help you with this composition stage is to use a mirror, and if you look at your drawing through a mirror, you will get the advantage of seeing your drawing from a different angle and a different perspective, and you'll see straight away if your drawing is off or you haven't got the proportions right, and that can be just a really nice way to check your composition. So I've got the rough kind of outline of the hare, and what I'm going to do now is just really have a look at some of the lights and darks. So to be honest, I would have maybe liked to have made that ear a little bit bigger. Let's make this ear just a little bit bigger. So you can remember it's your drawing and you can interpret it as you like. So if you wanted to make a feature a little bit bigger, so if you wanted to exaggerate the ears on the hare, then you can absolutely do that. And as I say, there's absolutely no right or wrong. It's your drawing and you can just have a lot of fun with it. So all I'm going to do now is work a little bit more on the hair and put a couple of little details in. So a little bit of detail around his eye, and just further mark out where the lights and the darks are going to be. So you might want to just carry on working in pencil and working on your sketch by doing lights to dark, or you might like to really focus in on detail. The other thing that you can do is using, again, a piece of tissue or a cotton bud, is you can actually blend your pencil, so you can get some quite nice shading effects like that. So just by working on your sketch, by shading, and then you can bring in detail again on top of that, and you can really get some nice effects with just your graphite pencil. Again, you can just pull out some highlights, so you might use your eraser just to get some highlights, and you can just continue to work like that, and you could end up with a really nice pencil sketch. If you want to work with watercolour, I'll show you how I like to just create a sort of splashy, sketchy watercolour, and then I'll also show you how to finish that off with a fine liner pen or a biro. So what I've done just before I start doing the watercolour is just to take some of the marks I've made with the pencil out a little bit. I've just tried to lighten it up a little bit. So once I put the watercolour down, I won't be able to rub out any of the lines. It doesn't really matter, you can leave them in, but I've just taken some of the shading areas. Obviously, if you're just kind of going to carry on working with pencil, then you want to sort of build up those layers of pencil. But instead of using pencil to do light and dark, I'm going to use the watercolour and just show you what different effects you can get. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the background, and you can just have fun, really. Don't worry too much. I just love using blue, so we can sort of hint at a sky, but we're not going to have a sky. And we can just hint at some colours, and it can be a really nice way to lift your drawing and just add a little bit of interest. So you can see where the colour's just starting to bleed because I've made wet onto wet. If you wanted to preserve some of these areas on the edge of the ear, you can just blot that. And sometimes it's quite nice to have what's called a hard edge or a soft edge. So when it starts to blend like that, you'll end up with a nice soft edge, and it can add a nice little bit to your painting. Obviously, we've already got a little bit of red here where we were playing about earlier on, so we can just kind of leave that. Obviously, my picture doesn't have a red background, but I don't really mind, because as I say, I don't want my picture to look exactly like the reference. I'm just using that to guide, and I'm going to use quite a lot of artistic license in how I build up the picture, and I quite liked that orange, and we'll just leave that there for now. I might come back to that, but we'll just put a bit of colour, and it doesn't matter if it overspills into your picture, because we can work over that in a little while. So we've done a little bit of background. We might have to put something up here. You can see where I've got some sketchy lines that I rubbed out earlier on, so we might have to do something to cover those up. So what I'm probably going to do is wait for those to dry, and then I will start to work on the hair. So we're going to finish the picture now with like a black pen outline. So I use these fine liner pens which are waterproof, and it just helps to lift the picture and gives a nice effect, I think. You don't have to do this, you could just finish with your watercolours, or you could use your watercolours to go in and do more detail. But I like to bring a little bit detail out with the pens. It's particularly good for perhaps hinting at some soft fur and things like that, and definitely for doing the whiskers. So these come in a variety of different sizes. So obviously the finer one's making a much finer line. So I've got a very fine one there, and then I've got I've got much thicker pens, and I've also got like a brush marker as well, so you can see the different effects. Again, you don't have to do this stage, it's just another technique that's quite nice that I use to quite good effect. So to work on the outline, I'm just going to use one of my pens. I'm just going to go for a sort of mid-size really, and I use my reference picture, and again it's almost like starting with that sketch again at the beginning where we're just working again, because what we're doing is quite a loose drawing. I'm not too precise. You can use almost like a scribbling effect, or you could be a bit more precise in where you leave your marks. So you could do sort of quite small directional marks. So this is just trying to demonstrate where the fur is on this hare, but it can look quite effective to use more scribbly marks. And again, you want to bring out where your darks are. You can use some of the cross hatching where you go in different directions in the particularly dark areas, and you can make lighter marks where you need to. Just like with the pencil, the lighter mark you make, you'll get a lighter effect, and you can press a bit harder to get the darker marks. You want to again take notice of where your lights and your darks are, and this is what's going to start to just bring a little bit more form to your drawing. So I'm just going to continue to work over my drawing. I will probably take a bit more care around the eyes and the facial features, because those are the bits that are going to really stand out and bring this little hare drawing to life. So once you've finished your picture, it's a good chance just to sit back and evaluate it a little bit and think about whether there's anything that you want to add or change. I'd be very careful, because the temptation is to do too much and you can end up kind of spoiling your picture really, especially as we've gone for a bit of a loose, spontaneous kind of sketch here. There's a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm not quite happy with the curve of his back here, so I'm just going to try and alter that a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of further colour just around his nose, and I'm going to add a little bit of background colour just between his ears there, because it's looking a bit odd the way it stops there. And I might just add a further little bit of pen shadow under his feet, and then I think I'm going to call this one finished. You can get to a point that you're happy, and the final thing to do is just to sign your name, just to say that you're happy with your picture.